Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. We are so excited to share a fun bonus episode with you, which this is episode 11. And if you followed us through this season, we just had a lot of fun talking about
it's been great.
The goodness of God, listening to the Holy Spirit, engaging in just what that looks like to sense what God is doing in your heart, to slow down enough to hear His voice. So we're very excited to have this bonus episode, and it's kind of special because we have some friends here with us. We have Asher Paxton and Anna Clark, and they're soon to be married, and that's really exciting.
Is that in March?
Yeah, March 9th.
March 9th? Wow, it's coming up soon.
Cool.
Okay, very cool. And the reason why this is kind of special and fun and important is because our friendship just started like 3 months ago. And I feel like we've known each other for a really long time. Would you guys agree?
Yeah. I think after we had dinner, we both looked at each other like, that was really easy.
Yeah. I said the same thing after we walked away.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, okay, so people listening are probably like, okay, get on with it. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, why are these people
Why are
here?
you guys friends?
What's this bonus episode?
Yeah. So to kind of bring a connection to this, we've talked this whole season about how to listen to the Holy Spirit, and we wanted to share a real life example of what can happen when you listen to God. Like truly listen.
And not only listen to Him, but talk to Him, like bring Him all the things.
Yeah. And so we have our lives intersected, and we have a story to share, which is really special to our hearts, and hopefully it's encouraging to you. And so I want to start out just by asking you all a little bit about your story and kind of how everything came to be with you all buying our home and us buying your home.
Yeah. So real quick, I think we should start at the end and go to the beginning. Yeah. So we're sitting in our home, and just a few months ago, Asher lived here, in this place. Mm-hmm. And they live in our old house where we did life for 7 years. So we didn't know them before that, totally strangers, could have been anyone buying each other's houses. And it just so happened that we all love Jesus. And so, that's the end of the story. So
I'm glad you actually said that. That makes a lot more sense.
Makes a lot more sense if we start at the end and go back to the beginning. So go ahead, Asher. Just what was your journey in starting to even search for a house? Where are you guys at in life, and what was your goal in trying to find a house?
I bought my first house long ago, 2021.
Before we met.
Before I met Anna Clark, with a good friend of mine. And it's kind of a rental investment sort of thing. So kind of have enjoyed doing investment things. And so when we bought the house that we're sitting in now, which is your guys's, we had the intention to make it an investment in a way. And we really kind of saw it on the market and had a vision for how it could be a cool space like that. We had imagined living downstairs, where I think the kids' bedrooms are now, and sort of making that into a space that would be like a kind of a condo, have a little kitchenette sort of thing, and the upstairs would be rented out. And once we moved in to this house, after we'd closed and kind of made the purchase, I'll say this too. When we were putting offers down, our realtor had told us that there was a backup offer that we were kind of competing against. And we ended up just, obviously in the real estate world here in Nashville, it's just crazy. So sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. Mm-hmm. And we just happened to get it.
Well, he told us that he thought we had a good shot because the other offer was contingent on the sale of their home, which is the house we ended up buying. Little did we know at that point, but he was like, we should still put an offer in. You guys have a good shot. They've got a contingency in theirs and you don't.
Yeah, yes. And so we kind of I moved in and started trying to imagine how the downstairs space would become, our new, basically the space we'd live in once we got married. And we would do some renovations to make it that. And come to find out, after kind of meeting the next door neighbor, and she brought up some things about the HOA and, just basically that we couldn't do what we hoped we could do. And so we started to really kind of wrestle with, man, Lord, did you put us in a place that wasn't possible, or like, how could that be true? We move in and I've felt like it was an answer to a prayer. So, okay, hey, we're here now. Like, all right, Lord, we're going to watch what you get to do here too. And it very quickly turned into absolute turmoil because we were sitting in a house that we quickly realized we couldn't do the things we'd imagined, and kind of sitting there asking God, like, why are we here now? Like, what do you have for us? Like, this neighbor next door is telling us things that we didn't realize before we moved in, and now we feel like we're stepping on toes. And are we meant to just like really minister to her in this season? Like, what do we have for us?
And I think it's easy with hindsight to say we were sitting in the, okay, Lord, what do you have for us? Like, I know for me in the moment, it was just sitting in panic and fear and anxiety. And like, I had a lot of anxiety about the house buying process in the first place. And then it felt I've had a lot going on in life. In the same, I guess, 3 weeks that we closed on this house and all this blew up, I was starting grad school and had just had knee surgery. So I was just in a place of chaos to begin with. And it felt like, to me, in the moment, I didn't have the ability to say, what do you have for this, Lord? I was just sitting in the, why is this happening? And all of my worst fears of being out of control, anxiety, being financially insecure. We can't afford this house. Are we about to spend a lot of money on a lawyer and things like that? That there were so many unanswered questions that I think I couldn't even think that far in that moment of like, where's this going to go? It was just this is terrible.
And hearing you guys say this, I'm thinking like we were over here still praying for this house, and we didn't know you at this point. So we were praying like, Lord, that's our house. Like, let it fall through so that we can have that house. And so just hearing what you guys were going through on the other side, it's just kind of crazy, because I'm like, did we pray for that to happen? Like, I wasn't praying specifically for your chaos and your turmoil, but like, you got to think, like, what was the Lord doing in both of that? Like, listening to our prayers and your prayers at the same time. It's just fascinating.
Our prayers don't necessarily equal something 100% what we see as humans as good.
Yeah.
It gives us hope to know that in future times when things are chaotic, that there's actually a plan at the end of it.
Yeah.
That there has to be something at the end.
And that the Spirit is interceding for us. So we may be praying one thing, and it might be totally interpreted to the Lord as a different thing, perfecting our prayers as we're, speaking in our imperfect minds.
We obviously get to a point where we're like, I don't know what we're going to do. And our realtor pipes up and is like, hey, so I know I kind of want to make this right. We didn't foresee your imagination of these investment possibilities falling through like they have. Let's find a solution. And he reaches out and he's like, hey, so when you guys were closing on the house, the backup offer had called me a couple times that day. And this is our realtor. His name's Phil. And he was like, yeah, well, I'd gotten calls multiple times, and this is just not normal necessarily. And like, they'd been asking like, hey, did they close on the house? Like, and he hadn't really thought much of it. I think he probably just expected that it was somebody asking. And so it sounded like a couple times that day. And so he's like, I'm curious, let's reach out to this family that we know it's a family. Let's reach out to them and see if they have any interest in maybe buying the house. At the time, we were thinking through all the options. Like,
it was everything from like, okay, if we can't rent it out 2 levels, our business partner's going to move in with 4 friends, and it's going to be a total bachelor pad boys house, and we're going to live in the other house and continue to run the owner occupied area. Like, it was just every scenario possible. It was like, okay, well, maybe we rent out the whole house and we buy a 3rd property. And like, it was just any possible solution. And I was pretty paralyzed in the just not even willing to really consider options. And so felt like a pipeline dream when our realtor was like, hey, there's this family. And long story short, he reached out and you guys were still interested and hadn't found anything in the week. And I think I couldn't quite be excited about any of that because I was so both protecting my heart, I think, out of like longing for a place to call home and like somewhere to feel like we could begin to plan for our marriage, and it felt so up in the air. And then also just anxiety of like, okay, well, worst case scenario just happened. So worst case scenario could continue to happen. And so I think that in that moment, like, I don't even know that I was willing to sit down and talk about the options. I tend to kind of shut down and not be able to even consider what the next steps are.
We were looking at a house just maybe a block from here, 2 blocks from here. And it's still actually, it's still
on the market.
It's still on the market.
Oof.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really grateful that we never did that. But I remember when we were touring that house, this was just a couple of days after we found out you guys closed. I was so distressed. I was just like, babe, I don't understand. God spoke to us. We prayed, your will be done, not ours. And he spoke to us and said, that's where you're supposed to live. That's where I want you. I want you in that neighborhood. And I don't feel right about putting an offer on this house. But if this is what you want to do, like, let's just discuss it. And I guess we'll put an offer in tomorrow morning. And I was so hesitant. And there was a reason for that, because there was a check in my soul.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Lord was just saying, like, hey, hold off. Don't push your agenda. Just wait till I do the fireworks and you're going to be so excited.
Yeah.
You know?
So there was a driveway situation at that other house that we had to check on before we were willing to put an offer in. So we were waiting on that information. And then Monday morning was when we were thinking about putting the offer in. And that's when your realtor called our realtor.
Crazy.
And when our realtor told us, we immediately were like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, we don't want to look at any other house. Because he was like, well, do you want to move ahead with this other house? And we're like, no, we've been talking about the Lethia house constantly. Like, that is our house. And we're here for it.
I remember hearing that and I was like, of course, that was what was happening. That things were changing. The Holy Spirit was like shifting our concept of what was supposed to happen.
Yeah. So say more about how you guys got to our house then.
Yeah.
We heard back that you guys were still interested, and we were like, okay, that's a really good option, but still the question of, okay, well, what are we going to do? Like, where are we going to live? What's that going to look like? And our realtor kind of just floated it. You might remember more than me, but I think he was just kind of like, well, their house still hasn't sold. I looked at it and it kind of feels like maybe it could fit what you guys are looking for. Would you guys be interested in going to tour? Yeah. And I looked at the listing, and I kind of the whole time we've looked at houses, we have very different styles in houses.
Yes, as do we.
Yeah.
Yes. And the house that he owned before we started looking for houses together is a little bit on the more modern side. And this one, the exterior feels a little more modern. It's a little bit more boxy and, cut out. And I remember he sent me the listing and I was like, oh, it's a cute little ranch cottage house. Like, I was like, it's so pretty. It has a front porch. It's white. It has windows and shutters. And I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah, let's go look at it. And so we kind of arranged to go look at it, and you guys left the house so we could look at it. And he got there, 10 minutes before me. And when I walked in the door, he'd already looked through the whole house, and he wanted me to look around, but I could just kind of tell by the smile on his face, like, this felt like our house. And I think I didn't realize in the moment, but walked in the front door and just felt really at home and like at peace, which was a feeling I really hadn't felt in the past month, even before the house flew up, just with the craziness of life and everything that was going on. And we kind of were there and walking around, and we're like, oh gosh, I could see our bedroom furniture in this bedroom, and I could see where this will all fit and come together. And it's got a fenced in backyard for the dog, which the house we're sitting in right now didn't have. And that was a concern. So just things falling into place, and we're walking out the front door and you guys pull up, and that wasn't the plan.
That was okay. So this is the weirdest thing. So I think your guys' tour was at,
Was it like 6:30 or something like that? It was like a later time.
So like Christian, who's our realtor, had told us like, hey, they're going to be touring from this time to this time. So just make sure you're gone. And we're like, okay. But the timing was even weird. Like, we hadn't had a tour that late at like,
dinner time.
It was just weird. So we ate dinner over at this friend's house. I think it was almost 7:00. And I was like, we should just head back. Like, they've got to be gone by now. And we pull into the driveway, and I was like, "Ah, crap! Hey, there's people still here." So we kind of are about to like back out, and then Asher, I was
like, no.
I think you waved us over, and I was like, "Oh,
I mean, you guys even had your cat. Like, you were fully
we did the whole thing. Yeah.
Go ahead.
By this point, I think and I'll say this: once we saw the listing, I was like, oh, we didn't have to walk in it for me to say this. If you remember this, I was like, that's our house. I know the Lord is putting us there. Every piece between you guys reaching out or us reaching out to you, it working out that way, us seeing it and like it being the house. I knew that I knew that I knew. And so when we walked in, even before we'd walked, I was excited. Once we stood there, I'm like, absolutely, come check it out, babe. Like, this is perfect. And so when you guys pull up, I'm like, oh, no, I want to talk to these people.
Yeah.
Like, let's hear their side. Like, we had heard one piece of you guys coming and sitting in the driveway here to pray for. And I was like, okay, so they know the Lord. Like, let's talk about what their faith side of
Which
this
that's not
is.
weird at all. You know?
So we did that like 4 or 5 times. Like we legit drove over to this area and just sat in the cul-de-sac and prayed over this house. We just had such strong faith that this was our house. And it was such a weird place to be in of like, okay, Lord, this has already closed. This house does not belong to us. It has already been sold to someone else. And yet we can't let it go. Like, what is that? What is that feeling?
And it wasn't, this is really important part of the story. It wasn't just an obsession with, especially for folks listening who are like, oh yeah, you wanted the house and you did anything you could get it. No, this has nothing to do with a house. Like, we could have moved into a shack that God wanted for us and that would have been amazing. It was this beautiful story watching it unfold of God's mercy and grace and just his favor. Because when we came over to pray, we weren't like, oh, the house is so beautiful, we just want that house. No, it was prayers being answered from years prior. Like Lindsey has been praying for years about a specific neighborhood for our kids, for us, where we can be healthier physically, where our kids can
play with neighbors. We've even talked about like a cul-de-sac.
And just this whole list of things. Yeah. And she's brought that before the Lord. And to see...
This is like a 3-year-long journey.
Yeah.
So Andrew and I were not on the same page for 3 years. Like, I had wanted to move to this neighborhood, closer to the kids' schools, closer to some of our friends. I really believed that, like, location was worth the extra money. And he is awesome financially and, like, wanted to pay off our house completely so that we could just not have to deal with any sort of mortgage, which is wonderful. And we were doing that. We paid down our house like really, really low. So he was like, it doesn't feel right. It's not the right timing. I had literally been on real estate apps for 3 years looking at houses constantly. Like, it became kind of a part-time job for me. I loved it. And I was very careful with what I showed him because I knew, like, oh, geez, if I show him another house, then we're going to get into a fight. Like, it's not going to go well. It has to sort of be worth it. And so when this house popped up, I wrestled. I was like, do I show him? I feel like this is worth it. I don't know. I'm going to take the chance. So I showed it to him, and he was the one who was like, yes, let's go see it today. Wow. And after 3 years of being like, I'm not interested in moving, for him to say, yes, let's go see it was already a work of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. Because it was so out of character from what we had been doing. All that to say, I had been praying specifically things that were met in this house and in this neighborhood that the Lord like answered almost every single prayer. And in addition to that, I had been praying specifically for you guys. I didn't know it was you guys, but I'd been praying for the people who would buy our house. And like, you guys fit several of the criteria that I was praying. So it just feels really, I don't know, surreal.
One of those things that we prayed for, you specifically, was that whoever would move into this house would sort of take the helm of sharing the gospel with the neighbors in this neighborhood, because we had done so much work in that neighborhood. We knew so many people there and engaged in their life on so many different levels, like deaths and births and people getting sick and just like loaning out lawn equipment and things like that. It's just like was this really deep relationship that we had with them, and we were like, whoever moves here, Lord, will you just help it to be someone who can sort of pick up that helm and at least know the Lord in a sense where they can share that. Just to see that you guys are now there, it's really special.
Well, I think like when we met you guys in the driveway and you just started talking about the house, and I think one of my biggest sadnesses when everything kind of started to go a direction that we weren't expecting was that I didn't feel like the neighborhood felt welcoming anymore. Like it was, understandably, like there was some personal things in there if I really struggle with people pleasing and needing some of that validation, but just knowing that we were in what I think could be called a feud of sorts with neighbors, and people were unhappy with us, and like all of that just hurt because I was craving like a home and a place that we could be supported as we step into this next journey of marriage and know like the people around us. And so one of the things you guys said was we wanted to be really transparent of like, hey, part of the problem with this house is we're having this hard relationship with a neighbor. And your response was, oh, well, we've already met her and she loves our kids and we think we could have a great relationship with her. And I was like in shock. I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like the Lord works in the craziest ways. And
honestly, a relief that we weren't passing something off that was a burden to us that was then going to be a burden to you. It's like, oh no, that was never a burden. It was for you guys. It was actually beauty.
Yeah.
And so, and preparation for your kids to share the gospel with her.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I think we had immediate relief once we knew. Personally, I was like, I can't not tell them that sort of thing. And it would have riddled me with guilt. And we didn't, and here we are, and excited for it.
That just goes to prove that like the things that we worry about being a stumbling block or something, like God has already done the work. Like we may perceive it as something when he is like turning it for good, you know? So.
And we've had our fair share of like, you know, I won't say bad neighbors, but crazy neighbors, you know. In every neighborhood there was always something going on, especially amongst large amounts of neighbors. And that's how it's going to be, you know. So for us, when you said that, I just remember thinking like, oh man, that neighbor has no idea what's coming their way because we are going to love the heck out of them. And that's been the case so far, and we're so grateful for that. But one thing I remember about that specific interaction, this is one of my favorite parts of the story.
You're going to cry, aren't you?
Yeah, I do this a lot. So I remember pulling up in the driveway and, you know, you all came over and were talking with us, and you guys had your agent with you. And then, you know, I think you had your friend with you as well. So they're like 6 of us adults. There's 2 kids running around.
Yeah.
And we're standing in a circle. And I thought, this isn't supposed to happen. Like people aren't supposed to, technically they're not supposed to meet each other when there's
not supposed
agents.
to swap houses. Yeah.
They're not supposed to swap houses. Like agents are supposed to do all the work and, you know, all this stuff, but we're like meeting each other. And then my favorite part was when we all just kind of were just talking about God's glory. And it felt like this moment that I'll never forget in my life, where it just was this like worshipful moment of God, it doesn't matter about these houses. Yeah. All this stuff's going away. All this stuff will go away in a moment's notice. When you return, the new heavens and the new earth, like this is so temporary. This is why we're here, is for these interactions, is for this life change. You are doing something on a grander scale. And that was just, for me, it was just so huge. Just that we were like we're basically just doing like church right there. Yeah. And I was like, I love this. I love this so much.
Yeah. And so I think for me too, in that moment, as we were all together, recognizing that like this wasn't just about us, like that our stories were intertwining. And that for me, since this had been such a long journey, 3 years of praying consistently and sort of being in just like a not good place with my husband and not being on the same page, for me, seeing like this is exactly why we had to wait 3 years. This exact moment is why we couldn't have sold our house 2 years ago and like landed on something, because like the Lord wanted it to culminate at this moment for you guys and for us. And to like, the whole point of that was to build our faith and to boast in him and to say like, we could not have come up with this in our wildest dreams.
No. Yeah. And I think, so we left that meeting and we went and got dinner and we were just chatting. We were like, okay, I think we want to move forward with this. We want to put an offer. And then we had to sit and say, well, how does this work out? Like, what are the numbers? What's the actual logistics of it all? And I think the whole time he's over there sitting just giddy with excitement, kid in a candy store smile, which tends to be how he approaches life. And I tend to approach it a little bit more from an anxious, pessimistic view. And so our realtor was kind of approaching it from that view as well. Of like, he's like, this doesn't happen. I've never seen this before. So we'll send them this offer. Like, here's what we need to make it work out. And, you know, because we had just put in a huge investment and we're now canceling a loan, asking for a new loan, like dealing with all this craziness. And he's sitting over there just like, well, it's going to work out. Like, you know, it's going to happen. Like, I full-heartedly believe that. And I'm sitting there over there with like the list of, okay, well, X has to happen, then Y has to happen, then Z has to happen. And just every step of the way, it was like just shattering the expectations or the walls I was putting up. And I don't think I've ever experienced that in such a real world way. This year, we've talked about this a lot, and I think I mentioned it to you guys before, has been, for me, like understanding what it means to hold the fullness of joy, because you can't experience that without sorrow and suffering. And I mean, our whole engagement period has been that of, we got engaged and less than 24 hours later, the Covenant school shooting happened and kind of wrecked the community we spend a lot of time in. And then we've had 2 family members pass away since we've been engaged. We had surgery. We've had some really hard discussions as we prepare for marriage. And this one felt like another one of like, oh my gosh, we bought a house, like ultimate joy. We're going to start our marriage. And then like just
the day after
crashing down and, you know, all of my worst fears coming to life. And so I think in that moment, I couldn't feel the joy again. And I'm just like now so grateful that every expectation and fear and anxiety I had was just completely shattered. Mm-hmm. And it was like hey, I'm pushing you to trust here. Look at the glory and beauty that comes when you actually do that. And I don't do that. It's been a life altering of how I'm going to view things in the best way.
What would it look like if we were to do that every day, all the time? Now, let me just state this. You know, we are imperfect, all of us. We're not going to be able to do that perfectly. No, but we can ask God for the power, the strength to rely on him every day, all day. Like, how has this shaped your faith? And how do you think it's shaped it for the future?
I'll break down the barrier of I'm perfect here, because absolutely not, and won't be able to uphold this like whatever I'm about to say of romanticized idea that I'll be really good at this. I remember being so giddy and like my Father is talking to me. Like I'm watching it happen. I feel like I never get these experiences with the Lord where I can visibly see him moving and talking, and I could see him laying out this plan, like from thing to thing to thing. Something happens that we don't expect, and then he gives an immediate answer, and then the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And I think honestly, we're blessed to have experienced it so quickly. Like for me, it was like, oh, I don't have an answer. And often in life, like that can last for years.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. What am I supposed to do with that? And so then for us, it happened in the matter of a couple days where we had a quick like solution to the problem. So we had a blessing there of Lord was talking to us very quickly. But like, even, and I say quickly because then when we moved into the house, I immediately turned into panic for the next thing we had to do. I was looking to the next part of the investment, and I completely forgot the beautiful thing that God had just done. And I've been listening to a lot of different things about in podcasts, and one of them's about about Passover and kind of remembering and what it means to remember yearly, and sometimes remember every in cycles, more than once a year. And the Israelites would make cairns or Ebenezer's to remind them of the things that they didn't want to forget. And so it feels like, in some ways, even recording this as a podcast is kind of making an Ebenezer so we don't forget.
Yeah.
So for in the future, when I do forget, I can look back to something. That's kind of the purpose of an Ebenezer, is to point at a thing and say, look what God did. And instead of just like forgetting it and going into the ether of our memory, instead, oh no, there's a thing. And it's funny that a house is a thing. It's even the house I have with Seth, like we would stand in it and forget. And now we're standing in this new house. And personally, I was forgetting. I was like already stressed again, not trusting in the Lord. And he has to to listen back to Holy Spirit and be like, no, I've watched you work before. Yeah. I can trust you to work again. And I can hold that trust continually in the next thing and the next thing. And I'm just revealing that I was immediately not perfect. I was so excited and I was watching God work. And then a week later was like, oh, I don't trust again. And it's just crazy how it's so human to do that. I mean, we watch the Israelites forget and forget and forget. And we kind of, as a human, I can look back and be like, oh, well, they forgot. Like, how could they forget? They're literally standing watching God move in a pillar of fire. And it's like, you're staring at God. How is it not vivid for you within the next year or so? And here I am a week later after something incredible happening and forgetting.
What I maybe am learning is to loosen like my white knuckled grip on just everything in life. And I think this year with the highs and lows that I mentioned earlier, I have just been reminded in the best way of how dependent I am on the Lord. Of like every time I think, okay, everything's looking up, like I've got it under control, it's all working out, it's like just cut down to my knees and like I'm back on the floor in prayer, and in suffering and in agony in a way, and being reminded that that's exactly what I needed to recenter. Okay, Lord, I'm on the floor and I have to let this go. Like there is nothing I can do to change my current circumstances. And the second I did that was the second that like the door opened, and I could have never willed that or even dreamt up that solution.
I think for us, what this whole house experience has done is leveled us up on our faith. Like really, like we jumped a couple rungs on the ladder. Like it just feels like there's no turning back for us. And I'm almost 40 too, so maybe that comes with a little bit of maturity. Maybe it's just like timing in my life and experiencing God in a real thing. Like I don't know what it is specifically, but I just feel like there's no turning back. Like I don't want to say my life has been changed, because it doesn't feel like it's about that. It feels like it's about discovering a new level of who God is and recognizing that he is doing this crazy thing that happened in your life and our life. He's doing this everywhere, all over the world.
All the time.
All of the time, day and night. And we don't get to see it. And so like recognizing that he is such a God of individuals and provides for us in very specific ways, and that all of our stories are intertwined. Like it's just united me to the body of Christ more, because I'm like, okay, we're all connected. Like we're literally all connected. We are the same body, unified by the same Spirit. And it's just opened me up to less worry and less control, because I'm just like, who cares? Like he's got it all under control. He has this wild plan, and all we have to do is listen. We have to pay attention. We have to pause and open our eyes and see like we were never in control in the first place. We just tricked ourselves into thinking we were. So yeah, I don't know. What about you, babe?
Yeah, I'll say that I think I have a deeper sense of God's sovereignty and his will and his power. I think after this experience, I mean, I felt like this before, but it was just kind of concreted in such a unique way where I don't have to worry about anything anymore. I used to have so much anxiety, and I still struggle with it every now and then, but I don't have to worry about anything, like nothing. And learning to take all of my decisions before the Lord. So everything from, I mean, even the other day I went out with a friend to lunch, and I was praying beforehand. I was like, okay, Lord, where should I take him? Like, where should I go? Like, where do you want me to go? And then on my drive there, I was like, hey, what do you want us to talk about? Like, guide me. Like, what do you want the conversation to be about? Is there something I need to say to him? Listen, like, give me a word. Everything from that to like, should we sell our car? You know, should we give it away? Should we buy this thing? Should we not buy it? Should we? Everything running it by the Lord. Because if we were to stop and actually do that for everything in our whole lives, we would have such a magical, mysterious ride of a lifetime where we're just like, we actually become a part of that, like what you were just talking about, Lindsey, the interwoven, God doing things all over the universe, we would actually become more a part of that. We would start to see more threads and see more of his character. Have you seen this opportunity kind of open up doors for conversation with friends, like testimony of the gospel? Okay.
Yeah.
Is there like a specific story or something, just a way that he's been doing that?
It's been a really cool, easy way to just speak the Lord's name in a place where you might not otherwise. And I have a little bit of a testimony of kind of being ashamed of a relationship with the Lord and never mentioning his name. So most of my college years, I wasn't around Christians, and I didn't ever want people to know that that was even a part of who I was, which really just meant I didn't have a relationship with the Lord at that point. But to me, the idea of I'm a Christian was going to immediately bring shame and judgment and distance from people who were the closest to me at that time. And so it wasn't something I was proud of. And the Lord has like radically changed my heart in the last few years, and I'm still really getting to know him. I've working my way through the Bible. I've never done that before. So there's a lot of things that are changing my life. And I think one of them is this opportunity for me to both challenge myself and also the Lord giving me an avenue to speak to people about him. So be like, oh, I heard you guys are looking for a house, or your mom mentioned that you bought a house and now you're figuring something else out. Like, what's going on? And just the opportunity to speak this story and share, like, quite literally, this would not have happened had the Lord not worked. And people don't understand.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, we swapped houses. They're like, well, how did that happen? You're like, it wouldn't have happened. Like, it was the Lord, and there's no other way to explain it. And just the freedom that has come with that of like, I see myself opening up more and more often about what the Lord has done for me, which I'm learning is the best way to share the gospel. Like, the best, the testimony, somebody said, you might remember who it was, but somebody, I think in our small group, was sharing that someone once described a testimony to them, it's not a story about you, it's a story about what the Lord has done for you. And I'd never heard it described that way. And I think that this experience has just showed me more and more, like, if I share what the Lord has done for me, it shows people what he could do for them. And that's just a radically different way of understanding my relationship with him. And I think that's been a really cool thing to see come out of this.
Yeah. I've just had a couple stories many stories of being in the office prior to this stuff and really struggling to find a way to talk about the gospel and kind of like praying to the Lord, okay, I know that I want to talk about you in a work setting, but it feels almost impossible, like kind of a mountain to climb of what's the door? Like, I don't want to just turn to my coworker beside me and be like, hey, do you know Jesus? Like, I absolutely could do that, but it doesn't seem natural, and it seems invasive, I think. Mm-hmm. And so people know me at work as somebody that does a couple of these investment sorts of things. And so it's pretty natural for me to talk about that. And God gave me a way to talk about the thing I really love and watching him work in the midst of the thing that is a joy. And so I've shared this story. I remember just multiple times, like somebody asking me, hey, how's it going with the house? And I would tell them, this story or that story in the midst of it. And finally we got to the end of it, and coworkers would ask me, like, no, do you have like 20 minutes? Because it's really hard to share this story without saying the whole thing. Like, I can't just tell you we swapped houses. That's just so minimizes the experience we had. Like, no, I really want to share with you the testimony of God's goodness and me hearing my Father speak to me through real estate, through a house. Like, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I could share the gospel and watch God work to all the people in my office that maybe don't know him or know him a little bit or have an estranged relationship. And it's like, no, I watched God work in the most basic sort of thing, like just buying a house, a very human experience. Like, you can see him work too. Like, look how cool it was in our experience, in our life. And I don't know, that's been such a blessing I can just think of multitudes of coworkers that I've been able to talk more openly. I had one coworker who's actually Jewish that was like, spoke up about this and was like, I don't hear people talk about God. Like, they don't say that. And I heard you say that. Like, that's actually really cool. And obviously being Jewish, she has different beliefs about, God in general, but like hearing her be excited about the Lord being talked about was cool. And I have, I was able to share with people that are my superiors and my peers. And now my peers have heard me share this. And in some ways, it kind of holds me to a different standard now. Like, I watched God work. Now I have to kind of uphold that, and which is a good thing. And hopefully I'm known as somebody that is seeing God work and can talk about it in a way so that somebody has, just imagine, down the road, and what you guys have probably experienced living at the house and hearing people go through pain and suffering, like, people start to wonder where hope is. And this is a place to, like, they can point at something, be like, oh, I think I know where hope might be. Let me go talk to that person that has talked about the hope of when suffering and strife happens, like, you can actually lean into God and see him work. I don't know.
Yeah. Asher, one thing you just said about, like, do you have 20 minutes? Like, it wouldn't do it justice to just say we swapped houses. Like, that was a big struggle for me because I had people asking us about it. And I'm like, I actually don't know if I want to share this with you. Like, it was such a sacred experience for us, in the way that the Lord so personally worked in our lives and revealed himself to us. Like, I was like, I'm choosing wisely with who I share this whole story to, because I hold it so dear.
Yeah.
And you're right. You can't just be like, oh yeah, we just swapped houses with some random people. Like, there are layers and layers and layers of how the Lord worked in your life and my life. And I felt like I can't even share this story online. Like, I didn't even tell some of my closest friends that I was moving because of how quick it all went down. I didn't even tell people we were moving. Like, it was like we let our community in on it while we were praying for this house and invited them to pray with us. Like, hey, this house, it's under contract with someone else already. Can you guys just pray with us that the contract will be broken and we will somehow get this house? Like, so those people who walked with us through this journey, it was such a joy to share what the Lord did. But for other people who didn't know the Lord, for me, that was a struggle because they made it about the house.
Right.
And I was like, you're missing the point.
They looked at the tangible thing.
Yes. And the question was like, how are you liking the house in the neighborhood? I'm like, I literally don't care. Like, God is amazing. He's alive, And so it just felt like I can't share the story with you unless you can hold it correctly.
Yeah, I definitely struggle with that a little bit too, because, I like to go into detail if I can about just like, how good God is on every level. And I had the same experience. And so there were just some times where I'd be like, you know what, I don't know if I can share that right now, but I had several like really close friends ask me that question. I was actually just exhausted of telling the story. Like, truly, physically, I was like, there's so much happening here, and I'm just human, and I can't retell it again for the third time today. 'Cause it takes me like an hour, and so I actually recorded like a voice memo where I was talking to one of my brothers or one of my friends, and I recorded that, and then I sent it to like 5 or 6 different guys, and I was like, this is the story. And that was the way that I was able to communicate it without having to like do it each time. So, okay. So as we sort of start to wrap up here, I want to thank you guys again for, this is so fun.
This is fun.
What advice, or I guess wisdom, would you give to, let's just say, really anybody looking to trust the Lord, but specifically in the housing market? Like, let's just say there's a couple out there that's, about to get married, and they're looking for a house, and they're like, how do we do this? Especially if they're moving to like a larger city. What advice would you give in terms of listening and waiting and trusting the Lord? I'll start by saying this, and you guys can pipe in if you want to, but there's nothing more exciting than trusting the Lord. I don't care. There's no roller coaster fast enough. There's no drug that gives you a high enough that is more exciting than just like following the Lord. Because when you experience the Holy Spirit's work in your life, you're just like, this is amazing. This is awesome. And so that's my encouragement, is just trust. If we believe that God is enough, if we believe that God knows everything and that he's sovereign, then we can trust him at every decision. He's got it covered. We literally just don't have to worry about it. So that's my advice to those. I mean, not just with housing stuff, of course. If you're just struggling to trust the Lord.
Oh yeah, my advice is this in John chapter 6. Then they said to him, "What must we do to be doing the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." Like that, the work we must do is believe that he's big enough to handle our needs. The work we must do is pray. The work we must do is trust. Yeah. Like that is, the whole process is made so much better by just coming back to that and recognizing that there's nothing physically I can do to change the outcome of X, Y, and Z. But I can pray, and I can trust in the one who can do all of the things that I can't. So that's my advice.
I think the thing about trust is that true trust has an expectancy with it that it will be okay. It's a faith, right? So true trust is expecting that our Father has something good for us, and that it's not, that he's not just going to like let us fall off the cliff, that he actually is catching us and holding us, and that he has good things for us. Whether it's a thing that we imagine as, a new car or something crazy like that, like that's not the thing he always has for us, but that there's something good to come from him. We're sitting in the goodness, and trusting and expecting that it will happen. And so when you're saying that it's like almost like a really good drug to trust in the Lord, it's because there's an expectation that there's a beauty we're going to find when we trust. Okay, Lord, what's next? Like, I trust you, and I'm not just trusting you in general. I'm like trusting that you have something beautiful for me. I think that's what's cool about it, is every little thing that we stand as humans and hope for, long for, if we can instead be like, no, Lord, what is the thing you've got for me on the other side of this? I actually trust you that there will be goodness in the midst of it.
I think, there's a lot of people out there who think similar to I do of like the what ifs, and he always helps me to reframe it and think like, okay, well, what if it goes great? Like, what if it doesn't go badly? What if it goes amazing? What if it works out? And could you dare to believe that it would be better and greater and more beautiful and sweeter than you could ever possibly imagine? Because that is the reality, is that we can't even fathom the like blessings and joy and goodness that the Lord has planned for us. And so it's just literally, would you dare to believe that it is going to work out exactly how it's supposed to, and that it will be more glorious than you could ever imagine, and that along the way you're going to get to see glimpses of his kingdom in ways that you would have never ever known it existed. And that's kind of a question I have written down in a journal, to just like, would I dare to believe that the promises the Lord has in store for me are like unimaginable?
Mm-hmm. And if he did not spare his own son, like, why would he not also give us all things?
Yeah.
Like, all things. Like, we are his children. And one of the things that I have been learning and kind of processing through is like not functioning out of a poverty mindset, but functioning out of like the true kingdom. Like, we are co-heirs with Christ. Like, we are literally reigning with him. And one day that will be a full reality. But for right now, like, that is our true identity. We serve a king, and we're welcomed into his home. And like, why do we feel like we can't ask him for things, or feel like he's not going to give us good things when we do ask? I do think it's like the reframing of like, we're not asking just for blessing. Like, if our prayer is your will be done and not mine, and he knows our hearts and it's pure, like, why would he not give us good things? So just kind of thinking out of that mindset rather than like poverty.
And I just want to end with saying this. So it may be a 20-year thing. It may be an entire life thing where you are constantly praying and saying, Lord, your will be done. And maybe it's not something good that you get right away. Maybe it's not goodness that you receive in the moment. Maybe it's not an epic story like what we just shared, which, by the way, is totally weird and epic, and we give God all the glory for. But whatever your story is, just be encouraged that he does listen, he knows, and he has a perfect plan, and we can trust him. So just want to thank you all again for joining us on this bonus episode. Kind of fun.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And for those listening, thanks for coming along with us on this journey. And we hope to continue to release some new stuff even after this, maybe some short form episodes, maybe another season in the near future. We're not sure yet. But thanks again for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Life in the Space. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated on future content that we have coming out, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If there's a friend that you think would find this episode helpful, feel free to also share this with them. And as always, if you have any thoughts or suggestions or just want to say hello to us, we love hearing from you. You can shoot us an email at lifeinthespacepodcast@gmail.com, and let's keep the conversation going.